Such was the man selected by George III as his champion against the Venetian party after the termination of the American War. The prosecution of that war they had violently opposed, though it had originated in their own policy. First Minister in the House of Lords, Shelburne entrusted the lead in the House of Commons to his Chancellor of the Exchequer, the youthful Pitt. And I mean, it's for me, if I'm reading this and when I'm reading this, it's difficult to distinguish not just between the two. I mean, it's very clear to distinguish between the two classes, but it's difficult right now. That's a on the lighter side to distinguish between fiction and reality. I don't know if we can analyze this later. I don't know if his other critics have said this, and how many of these characters really taken from real life are, of course, they are dealt with justly, but what's the fictitious part? I think the people around Pitt, right? And maybe he's done total justice to them. The administration was brief, but it was not inglorious. It obtained peace, and for the first time since the Revolution, introduced into modern debate the legitimate principles on which commerce should be conducted. It fell before the famous coalition with which the great Revolution families commenced their fiercest and their last contention for the patrician government of Royal England. In the heat of that great strife, the king, in the second hazardous exercise of his prerogative, entrusted the perilous command to Pitt. Reads like a history book. I mean, during the happier years of Mr. Pitt, the influence of the mind of Shelburne may be traced throughout his policy, mortgage aristocracy, William at the Hague with one of his prime abettors of invasion. It's just amazing. The Duke of Wellington, almost reads like a book of history. I just wanted to sort of share that with you a little bit. Flipping the pages because I haven't had the time to read it in its entirety. This is about bills being brought, and then the bill was thrown out, and Lady Marney gave a grand ball to celebrate the event and to compensate the London shopkeepers for the loss of their projected franchise. The events of 1830 did not produce any change in the modes of thought and life of Charles Egremont. He took his political cue from his mother, who was his constant correspondent. Lady Marney was a distinguished stateswoman, as they call Lady Carlyle in Charles the First time, a great friend of Lady St. Julian's and one of the most eminent and impassioned votaries of Dukism. Her first impression on the overthrow of her hero was astonishment at the impertinence of his adversaries, mingled with some lofty pity for their silly ambition and short-lived career. She existed for a week in the delightful expectation of his grace being sent for again, and informed everyone in confidence that these people could not form a cabinet. When the stoicism of peace, reform, and retrenchment sounded, she smiled bitterly, was sorry for poor Lord Grey, of whom she had thought better, and gave them a year, adding with consoling malice that it would be another canning affair. At length came the Reform Bill itself. And no one laughed more heartily than Lady Marney. Not even the House of Commons, to whom it was presented, the bill was thrown out, right? So it's amazing. It's a pleasure turning the pages. And look at it, this is chapter 8, first line. We must now for a while return to the strangers of the abbey ruins, when the two men had joined the beautiful religious whose apparition had so startled Egremont. They all three quitted the abbey by a way which led them by the back of a cloistered garden, and so on by the bank of the river for about 100 yards, when they turned up the winding glen of a dried up tributary stream. That's beautiful literary expression. And I just want to share about the Duke of Fitz and Aquintin. Now these are fictitious characters, but An amazing, amazing book. Someday I'll read it in entirety and more about Disraeli and by Disraeli closer to when I get back to my PhD. So thank you for sharing this historical literary moment with me.